أتباعهم جميعا إلى كربلاء إني سلم لمن وحرب لمن وولي وعدو لمن عاداكم. فأسأل الله الذي يكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة، وأن يثبت لي عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة، وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله، وأن يرزقني طلب ثأره مع إمام هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم. وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يعطيني بمصابي بكم أفضل ما يعطي مصابا بمصيبة ما عظمها وأعظم رزيتها في الإسلام. During these nights, the قافلة of the Sabaya are heading towards Sham. وما أدراك ما شام يا رقي. During these nights in the Khariba of Sham, you're going to hear a call of Baba حسين بابا حسين العطش حسين they hit me بابا. Every time I call out Baba, Shimon raises his hand, oh Baba Hussein. وعظم رزيته يا رقي في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض. اللهم اجعلني في مقامي هذا من تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إن هذا يوم تبركت به بنو أمية وابن هاكلة الأكباد اللعين ابن اللعين على لسانك ولسان نبيك. During these nights, Yazid asked for the people of Sham to decorate the streets of Sham. For he refers to them as Khawarij and Kuffar, the daughters of the Prophet. For the first time, people look at the face of Zainab al-Kubra. اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية، عليهم منك اللعنة وبدل العابدين. وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه. اللهم فضاعف عليهم اللعنة منك والعذاب الأليم. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقفي هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم وبالموالاة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليه وعليهم السلام. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد. يا زهراء لاذت وراء الباب رعاية للستر والحجاب. قال سليم قلت يا سلمان إذ دخلوا ولم يكن استئذان. اللهم لعن أول ظالم، اللهم لعن أول ظالم. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله، اللهم نعلهم جميعا 100 مرة. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. Together to the head of Hussein, send your salam to the head of Aba Abdullah. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني، مبدأ به أولا ثم لعن الثانية والثالثة والرابعة. اللهم لعن يزيد خامسا، ولعن عبيد الله بن زياد وابن مرجانة وعمر بن سعد وشمر وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيام. السجود. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين، لك على مصابهم، الحمد لله على عظيم رزيتي. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود، وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين والذين بذلوا مهجهم دون الحسين عليه السلام. الله
تاجیل ظہور امام زمانہ بلند تر صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل وارحم.
جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا، سر زندہ کی دیواروں سے، سر زندہ کی دیواروں سے ٹکراتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا. دربار یزیدی میں بھلا کیسے میں جاؤں، دربار یزیدی میں بھلا کیسے میں جاؤں، ہے چاک گریبان حیاتی ہے بابا، جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے. کانوں سے ٹپکتا ہے لہو، شانوں پہ دیکھو، کانوں سے ٹپکتا ہے لہو، شانوں پہ دیکھو، ظالم کی اذیت مجھے، ظالم کی اذیت مجھے تڑپاتی ہے بابا،
جب یاد سکینہ کو مر جاؤں گی پیاسی نہ کبھی مانگوں گی پانی مر جاؤں گی پیاسی نہ کبھی مانگوں گی پانی اصغر کی مجھے پیاس جو یاد آتی ہے بابا جب تک تیرے سینے پہ نہ سو جائے سکینہ جب تک تیرے سینے پہ نہ سو جائے سکینہ زندہ میں اسے نیند کہاں آتی ہے بابا جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا جلتے ہوئے خیموں کے نظارے نظر میں جلتے ہوئے خیموں کے نظارے نظر میں یہ بات خیالوں سے کہاں جاتی ہے بابا جب یاد سکینہ کو تیری آتی ہے بابا درود بیج محمد و آل محمد پر I request you all to recite 5 times Amin Jibril for all those who are sick and in need of our du'as. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء ولعنة الله على أعدائهم وعلى منكر فضائلهم وعلى من شارك في ولايتهم من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين آمين رب العالمين. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. يا غريب الغرباء يا مظلوم كربلاء السلام على من جعل الله الشفاء في تربته. السلام على من الإجابة تحت قبته. السلام على ساكن كربلاء. فيا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي. يا سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ومن يعظم شعائر الله فإنها من تقوى القلوب. صدق الله العلي العظيم وآمنا به. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أحبائي, before we begin tonight's majlis, if we may recite Surah Al-Fatiha for a scholar from the scholars of Ahlul Bayt that truly has left a void in the Shia Ummah. Ayatollah Sayyid Mohamed Saeed Al-Hakim, who passed away in Najaf Al-Ashraf in the last day or so. Ayatollah Mohamed Saeed Al-Hakim, the grandson of Ayatollah Mohsin Al-Hakim, one of the four Maraja in Najaf who were in essence the foundation and the backbone of the Hawza Ilmiya. The Ayatollah Mohamed Saeed Al-Hakim played a great role in keeping alive the spirit of Aza and the spirit of the Sha'a'ir of Imam al-Hussein, not only in Najaf al-Ashraf, but within Iraq and beyond. and from all the great work he did as a marja taqlid, perhaps there is no greater work that will give him the highest levels of Jannah, inshallah, with Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, other than the book Faji'atul Taf. Faji'atul Taf, the tragedy of Taf, yani the tragedy of Karbala, the tragedy of Ashura, which in itself forms as an encyclopedia by index for doors and doors of research for the Ummah and for the scholars when it comes to understanding the tragedy in Karbala. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that on these nights, the servant of his whom he has decided to take back is blessed and granted the highest levels in Jannah, insha'Allah. And for Allah Azza wa Jal, through the grace of Wali al-Amr to protect the Hawza of Najaf al-Ashraf and the houses around the world that truly work to serve the cause of Ali Muhammad. Rahimallahu man qara'a surat al-Mubarakat al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Ahibai, tonight, Majlis Azam to uphold and pay tribute, uphold the dhikr of and to pay tribute to the Lady of Light and this granddaughter of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Aba Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, known as Sayeda Khawla. And last year on the Shahada of Sayeda Khawla, we elaborated to a certain extent, historically speaking, how the grave of Sayeda Khawla was discovered in the city of Baalbak, and the family that discovered the grave, the family of the Al-Jari, and how the family of Al-Murtada, respected, credible families inside of Baalbak, then went on to become custodians of the grave of Sayeda Khawla. Because we spoke about this last year, I will not touch on this, but perhaps the lecture is on the channel for anyone who would like to follow up and gain more information on that. Tonight, I want to discuss a different element of the tragedies of Bani Hashim that resulted to the martyrdom of Sayeda Khawla. Ahibai, the tragedy of Ashura and the sacrifice of Imam al-Hussein and his companions that took place on the day of Ashura. The second part of this revolution, if you were to look at the revolution of Ashura, and by way of an example, very basit, take it to be a coin, you find one side of the coin is the sacrifice of Imam al-Hussein and Bani Hashim and the tragedy of the day of Ashura, and the other side of the coin is the tragedies and the imprisonment and the role of the women of Bani Hashim. And they kept alive the legacy of Sayyid al-Shuhada and the values, the manner in which he was martyred. For you have from the tragedies of the women of Ahlul Bayt that they left Karbala on the 11th of Muharram after Zawal and were taken as prisoners from Karbala to Kufa. From Kufa, they were then taken to Sham until they reached the Darbar of Yazid al-La'in. And over here, there are a number of points that are historically important and that also have an aqaidi impact, which inshallah we will discuss over the night tonight. For number one, the Sabaya Ali Muhammad, yani the prisoners from the camp of Ali Muhammad, left Karbala on the 11th of Muharram after Zawal, and they reached the outskirts of Kufa on the same night, yani the night of the 12th. If they left on the 11th day Muharram after Dhuhr, the same day by Maghrib or a little after Maghrib, they had reached Kufa. But they were not paraded into the city of Kufa until the morning of the 12th of Muharram. And the historians come forward and say that that night, the 11th, yani the 12th night, the 11th day, the night after that, they spent that night in Masjid Hanana as prisoners. And this was the same place that Sayeda Shuhada, when Khuli al-La'in left Karbala to go towards Kufa with the blessed head of Sayeda Shuhada, he also stopped at this place of Masjid al-Hanana, which is why there is a spot over there and a mashhad, which is the mashhad, yani the place of where the blessed head of Sayyidah Shuhada was placed. For the women of Ali Muhammad, or the prisoners of Ali Muhammad, reached the outskirts of Kufa on the 11th Muharram after dark and were paraded in the city on the 12th of Muharram until they were brought into the palace of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad al-La'in. They then stayed in Kufa and then moved towards Sham. The first point over here, which is a point of ta'ammul and the point of contemplation, is the number of people from Bani Hashim who were taken as prisoners. Who were these prisoners and how many were they in number? When you come and you look at historians, the likes of Sheikh Abbas al-Kummi, rahmatullah alayh, in Nafas al-Mahmum, and in essence it takes from Kitab al-Kamil, he states that the number of the prisoners were 20. However, if you were to refer back to older books from within the Makatil and scattered texts that analyze the entire tragedy of Karbala in different proportions, we begin to understand that Sheikh Abbas al-Kummi perhaps had access from Kitab al-Kamil only to a few women from the Bani Hashim. Otherwise, the number of people from the camp of Bani Hashim from Karbala on the day of Ashura who were taken as prisoners from Karbala to Kufa and Kufa to Sham, their numbers were most likely between 60 to 100. 60 to 100. And it is important that we understand the makeup of this kafila. You will find that within this kafila that was taken as prisoners, you can categorize the people who were there into 10 different categories. Number one, you had the males or the men. You cannot say men, but you can say males because some of them were children. The males who were taken, surviving males from Karbala who were taken as prisoners to Kufa and Kufa to Sham. Their number was 5. You had Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zainul Abidin, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. You had Imam Mohamed ibn Ali al-Baqir, who was 2 years of age. Alayhi salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And we had 3 sons from Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba. The first of them was known as Hassan al-Muthanna, who was, according to a number of the historians, in his early 20s. He fought on the day of Ashura and fought valiantly until his arm was severed, and the number of injuries that he had sustained he fainted on the battlefield. For the enemies thought that in essence he has died. But on the 11th of Muharram, as they started to behead each and every one of the shuhada, they found within him a pulse. And so they decided to take him as prisoner, thinking that they will humiliate a prisoner of war and give him a harder death on horseback or camelback rather than to behead him there. So the first son of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, Hassan al-Muthanna, and there were two other sons of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba who were also taken as prisoners, Zayd ibn Imam al-Hassan and Amr ibn Imam al-Hassan. So in total, from the kafila of the Sabaya, the prisoners of Ali Muhammad, there were 5 male, between men and children. Imam Sajjad and Hassan al-Muthanna, men, and the children, you have 3. Total of 5 male. This is the first category. And then you have 9 other different categories of women who made up this kafila of Ali Muhammad. And I will go over their categories very quickly for you. For you have the men or the males. After that, you have the wives of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil faraja. For a number of the historians have mentioned that there were a few wives of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam who were also present in Karbala. Number 2. Number 3, you had the daughters of Amir al-Mu'mineen who were present in Karbala. From the daughters, you have the likes of Aqilat Bani Hashim, Sayeda Zainab alayhi salam. You have Sayeda Kulthum. These are 2 of the daughters who are mentioned the most. But in addition to this, we have daughters of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the likes of Sayeda Sukaina. Sayeda Sukaina, who is buried in Daraya in Sham. And she actually accompanied Sayeda Zainab back to Sham when Sayeda Zainab was exiled from Medina. So with Sayeda Zainab, Sayeda Sukaina traveled and Sayeda Fidda traveled. And hence both their graves are based inside of Sham. And Sayeda Sukaina, in essence, is responsible for the large number of Shias that embraced the wilaya of Ali Muhammad right under the capital and the territory of the enemies. Historically, a big part of Sham from the ends of Daraya became Shia because of the barakat of Sayyidah Sukaina, daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen. In addition to that, from the daughters of Amir al-Mu'mineen, there was a daughter known as Sayyidah Ruqayya, who was the wife of Imam Muslim bin Aqil. And you have Sayyidah Khadija, the daughter again of Amir al-Mu'mineen, who was married to the brother of Muslim bin Aqil alayhi salam. For you have the men, you have the wives of Amir al-Mu'mineen, number 2. Number 3, you have the daughters of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Number 4, you have the wives of Imam al-Hussein who were there, the likes of Sayyidah Rabab, the likes of Sayyidah Layla. For example, you have Ishaq, who they call one of the wives of Imam al-Hussein. And you have the daughters of Imam al-Hussein. The daughters of Imam al-Hussein is a place of great contention between the muhakkikeen and between the historians. However, historians are able to verify 7 daughters of Imam al-Hussein that were present in Karbala. This is 5th category. The 6th category is the widows, the wives, the widows of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, who were present on the day of Ashura, the likes of Sayyidah Ramlah, the mother of Shah Qasim alayhi salam. Number 7, you have the daughters of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, who were present on the day of Ashura and were taken as prisoners. Number 8, you have the wives of the Shuhada of Bani Hashim, who were not from the daughters of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Hassan or Imam al-Hussein. One example of this is Sayyidah Lubaba, who was the wife or the widow of Maulana Abul Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam. This is the 6th, 7th, 8th category. The 9th category is the widows or the women that accompanied the companions of Imam al-Hussein who were martyred. So some of the women who are also taken prisoners from the companions, for example, you have the wife of Ali ibn Madahir. Ali ibn Madahir was the brother of Habib ibn Madahir. Laylat Ashura, Ali goes to his wife and he says to him, Imam al-Hussein has given us permission to be free tonight and has given us permission to leave Karbala without any blame. She said, what do you plan to do? Ali said, I plan to give my life for Imam al-Hussein, but I now hereby divorce you and set you free such that you may travel and live your life. She says to him, oh Ali, you did injustice to me. For if you were to be killed with Hussein, then I will be prisoner with Zainab. For you have the wives of these companions who were taken as prisoner and participated in this grief, who were a part of this grief of Ali Muhammad. From amongst the women of the companions, you have Wahab ibn Wahab, the companion who was on the path of Nabiullah Isa and then embraced Tashayyu'. His mother was a part of this group of the Sabaya, and his wife Sayeda Khawla was also taken as prisoner. And one of her last wishes is before Wahab went to the battlefield, she went to Imam al-Hussein and she said to him, Ya Aba Abdullah, once my husband goes into the battlefield, he will be killed and attain Jannah. And for me, I will be a widow for the rest of my life. For my request to you is that you place me as part of your family, such that whatever happens to them happens to me. You find that Sayeda Khawla went as prisoner together with Sayyida Zainab. And then the last category, which is the 10th category, is you have women who are affiliated with Ahlul Bayt, who are not within the first 9 categories necessarily. And an example of women who are in this category was the likes of Sayyidah Fiddah alayha salam, who had been a servant and had been affiliated with the house of Ali Muhammad, and she accompanied Sayyidah Zainab into Karbala and beyond. Therefore, when you look that there are 10 categories of women, and there is great research to be done to verify the numbers of the women in each and every one of these categories, you will find the muhaqqiqeen will come forward and they will put for you a range that this number was between 60 to 100. And there are some who have said 120. In fact, Ayatollah Mazandarani, rahmatullah alayh, he puts the count when the women were leaving Medina with Imam al-Hussein. On 27th of Rajab, when they were leaving to Karbala, the total added up to 222. For there is a big part of history over here, and there are reasons why you will find that the nawasib of this ummah went above and beyond to hide or to eradicate the stances of the women and what happened to the women. Now, since we are on the number of the women who are part of the Sabaya of Ali Muhammad, a person might come to you and may say to you, well, how come these women and these daughters of Imam al-Hussein and so on and so forth are not mentioned in other books of history? For example, why is it that Sheikh Mufid in Kitab al-Irshad does not mention that Imam al-Hussein had 7 women? Over here, the most logical and most simplest answer is that Sheikh Mufid in his greatness wrote Kitab al-Irshad as a historical book of index. At best, it is seen as an index which a researcher then uses to open up multiple doors of research within those fields of the lives of each and every one of the Ahlul Bayt. You will find within the culture of the Hawza Ilmiya and the culture of historians within the Hawza Ilmiya, when they refer back to Kitabul Irshad as a source or a primary source of research, it is a primary source of research that allows them or directs them to a number of other doors of research using this as the opening. Iltifat that it provides towards them. You have Sheikh Mufid, the fact that Sheikh Mufid, for example, does not mention these daughters of Imam al-Hussein, like Sayeda Amina or Sayeda Safiya or Sayeda Khawla, this does not negate the existence of these daughters, especially when you keep in mind the seerah of Ali Muhammad and the seerah of Ahlul Bayt when it came to being conservative about the identity of the women inside of the house, which is why Ibn Abbas himself says, we did not know that Amir al-Mu'mineen had a daughter known as Zainab. It was until towards the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. For you find that there was this level of conservative behavior in terms of honor, in terms of dignity, in terms of chastity, that the women of the house are not publicized in this manner. In any case, you find that the number of the women from the Sabaya between 60 to 100 by majority of the historians. If we understand that this was the number, the second question that comes over here is that the journey from Karbala to Kufa and then Kufa to Sham, is it possible that the Sabaya traveled this entire journey within a single year? And even more than that, that they were able to undertake this journey, were under prison or were imprisoned, and then they were freed from prison and reached Karbala on the 40th of Imam al-Hussein. Yani within 40 days, they traveled from Karbala to Kufa and Kufa to Sham, were imprisoned in Sham, left Sham and traveled back to Karbala, all within a span of 40 days. Is this possible or not? Did it all happen within 1 year or did it happen in the other year? And this becomes, again, a heated debate within the books of history. And you find that within this debate between the different historians, you have a number of people that come forward, people of nifaq and people of shak. There is a difference when a person asks for ilm and when a person plants seeds of doubt due to nifaq in order to try and shake the foundations and the aqidah of the people when it comes to Imam al-Hussein and Arba'in. But the question over here is that, is this journey possible within 40 days? And if it is not possible in 40 days, then why do people go for the Ziyarat al-Arba'in? Because Arba'in means 40. They then come forward and they say that the Ziyarat al-Arba'in in essence is a fabrication by the Shias, and there is no religious standing in this sort. It all boils down to understanding the historical reality of this. As we said, historians are of two types. There is one group of historians who are of the opinion that Ali Muhammad were in prison for an entire year and they returned back to Karbala on the 20th of Shahr al-Safar for the following year. But if this was the case, number one, you could not call it Ziyaratul Arba'in because the word Arba'in means 40th, which is the 40th of after the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein. They have their reasons for stating a year, and negating those reasons or challenging those reasons is a bahath on its own. Our point of understanding today is the side of the historians that established that Ali Muhammad, the Sabaya from Ali Muhammad, actually were taken from Karbala to Kufa and Kufa to Sham and Sham back to Karbala within 40 days. Number one, yes, there are what is mashhur amongst the historians is that they traveled within these 40 days and they reached Karbala on that first 40th. The question that arises from here is that, is it possible physically, logically, for Ali Muhammad to make this entire trip and return back to Karbala within a period of 40 days? And many times you will see that the doors of Nifaq and the doors of Shak start from here. They say that it is not possible for this entire journey to have happened, especially when you keep in mind that Ali Muhammad traveled through at least 59 cities or towns in their journey from Kufa to Sham. If you were to do simple calculations and you find that those who have focused and are concentrated, who have concentrations in history for this nature, they will be able to attest for you. There were 3 routes potentially from Kufa to Sham. 3 travel routes that were generally used. One travel route was a travel route that cut right through the desert from Kufa to Sham. There were no stopping points. There were very few towns, far and wide in between, limited, if any, access to water. You could think about it as an express route that cuts right through the desert. And this route was pretty much used, if we speak in today's lingo, it was pretty much used as the postal route of the time. Postal route, yani how? At that time, because you can imagine when you have an empire this big, the infrastructure of communication has to be some sort of reliable to a certain degree and established. For what used to happen is the postal route is that the postmen would use horses. So you'd have a postman on a horse, and these were horses that were bred particularly for the reason of running long distances at fast speeds, just like the way you breed horses, especially for racing. Horses that are bred for a race, the method in which they are bred, the method in which they are trained is very different than a horse that is kept for domestic reasons or a horse that is used in a circus or any other thing. So you had these Arabian horses, you could think of these as stallions of the highest breed that were reserved for this postal network. And what would happen is, so for example, when Ibn Ziyad al-La'in says, when Ali Muhammad reached Kufa, I will send a letter to Sham and I will see what the response from Yazid is, whether you should be taken as prisoners to Sham or be killed. What will happen is that a letter was given to the postman. The postman rides his horse, cutting right through the desert between Kufa to Sham. But there were postal routes every 150 kilometers, every 200 kilometers, every 300 kilometers. So the first postman on his horse cuts a distance of 150 to 200 kilometers, hands over the letter to another horseman who is waiting, who will cut another 200, 250 kilometers, will stop and give the letter to a next one. So you can imagine there is no delay in transit and there is no delay in a postman stopping for any other regions. And for this particular system, they were able to cut distances between Kufa to Sham in a period of as less as 3 days, because you have horses that are running 24 hours. No one is stopping in between. The system has been designed in such a way that the horse can run maximum distance at maximum speed until the post stops and he gives it on to the next person. The next person starts. We've seen sometimes in the race, they have these relay races. When one stops running, he passes the baton to the other one to run. The running is continued 24/7. And this is the reality of how the postal system at that time worked. So this was the first route. And then you have 2 other routes One of them, between Kufa to Sham, is a route that goes by the Furat, where you have these 59 towns. And this is the route that I want to discuss with you tonight. We will leave the third route out so that it doesn't get too complicated and we don't go too over the time. The second route that was taken by the Sabaya of Ali Muhammad, the prisoners, between Kufa to Sham, these 59 cities or towns from Kufa, the first stop from Kufa was towards Hilla. And from Hilla, they went on to Qadisiyah. From Qadisiyah, the cities that they passed, and this is not in order, but the cities that they passed, present-day cities, you have Mosul, you have Tikrit, you have Sinjar, and then you have Halab, which is in Syria, you have Homs in Syria, and you have Baalbak, which is part of present-day Lebanon, and the end destination, Damascus. And you will find that this route is in close proximity to the river Furat. And this is because when you have the horsemen, and we have within the books of history, there were close to about 100 to 150 horsemen who were tasked with taking the prisoners of Ali Muhammad in the most difficult of circumstances between Kufa to Sham. They were in need of constant access to water supplies, and hence this path. Now, this path that they took between these cities, 59 cities and towns, in total, give or take, is a distance of about 2,100 kilometers. 2,100 kilometers. If you return back to the people of concentration in history, within this particular field, you will find that the Arabian camel has the capacity to cover, on average, 160 kilometers per day in distance. So if on a camel, you can cover a distance of 160 kilometers per day, on average, with the speed times going up, going down, stopping time, this, that, what, not, 160 kilometers. If you were to divide 2,100 by 160, math is not in my mind, but it should be give or take 13 days, 12 days, 13 days. Any one of the Shabab can 13.125, ahsantum, 13 days, give or take. As per the historians, you'll find the latest date that is recorded by historians for the Sabaya of Ali Muhammad leaving Kufa towards Sham is 19th of Muharram. So from 19th of Muharram, you count a distance of 2,100 kilometers that need to be covered. And on a daily basis, the Arabian camel is able to cover a distance of 160 kilometers. From 19th of Muharram, count 13 days. You come to, on the assumption that in that year, Shahr Muharram was 30 days, give or take, they entered Sham on 2nd of Safar, which is mutabik tamaman with what our history stipulates and what has been accepted as mainstream belief by the Shias. For if they reached Sham on the 1st or the 2nd of Shahr Safar, we also know that they left Sham on the 10th of Safar. Now, this should not be a point of confusion that, oh, they were only imprisoned in Sham for 8 days and this imprisonment was not much. This doesn't take down from the weight of the imprisonment. Every day in that prison in Sham was equivalent to 100 years of mine and yours. Not to mention the 13 days of travel and what has happened in that travel, the manner in which they had to travel. For if they left Sham on the 10th of Shahr Safar, and the return from Sham to Karbala is not passing through 59 odd cities and through a shorter route, Hatman, you find that mathematically, realistically, historically speaking, it was absolutely possible. And indeed, it did happen for Ali Muhammad to travel from Karbala to Karbala within 40 days. For when you have so-called scholars sit on the member of Ali Muhammad and have the audacity to scorn, and they tell you, how was it even possible for them to reach Karbala on the 40th day? And logically, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, logic. Yeah, logic. It goes against every aspect of ilm, every aspect of knowledge when it comes to authenticating history and the science of authenticating history. For you find over here that the Sabaya Ali Muhammad were able to return back to Karbala, and the reason that the imprisonment inside of Sham was reduced was because of the martyrdom of Sayeda Khawla and the grief that it caused inside of Sham, such that Bani Umayyah felt that their empire is going to turn over on them. And for this reason, they said that it is in their best interest and maslihah to free Ali Muhammad from here. For if we understand this, Ahibai, we understand that, number one, the number of the prisoners from the family of Ali Muhammad, from the Karbala to Kufa, the number range, according to the historians, between all the 10 categories of the people of Bani Hashim, between 60 to 100. And number two, by being taken as prisoners across 59 towns or cities over a distance of 2,100 kilometers, it was absolutely possible for them to return back to Karbala, Yom Arba'in. If we understand this, you see the tragedies that Ali Muhammad went through on this journey. Do you know the women and the children of Bani Hashim who gained the martyrdom as prisoners from this journey of Kufa to Sham? The first Shahida, the first martyr from the Sabaya, from the women of Ali Muhammad. And tonight's Masaib is extremely difficult on the heart. It's very difficult to bear. So keep with me. And if you have the heart to listen to this, the first Shahida, the first martyr from the women of Ali Muhammad, and there are other ones before, but if we take from what is in the general term, from the first women who was Shahida, martyr from the prisoners of Ali Muhammad, the daughter of Amirul Mu'mineen by the name of Sayeda Khadija. Sayeda Khadija bint Amirul Mu'mineen, you know where her grave is? Her grave is right next to Masjid al-Kufa. She was married to the brother of Muslim bin Aqil, who was also Shaheed on the day of Karbala, on the day of Ashura, together with his two sons, Mohamed and Saeed. Sayeda Khadija bint Amir al-Mu'mineen, few years younger than Sayeda Zainab. She's lost her husband. She's lost her two sons in battle. See what led to her martyrdom and her death in Kufa. Maktal says, Shame Gariban. Shame Gariban. Umar bin Sa'ad al-La'in al-Shimar se. Ahriku khiyam al-Khawarij. burned the tents of the Khariji. They said the women are inside, the children are inside. He said, "Ahrikuha ala man fiha." Burn the tents on top of those who are inside of this. This kalam is the same kalam as the Fir'aun of this ummah when they came to burn down the house of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. They said to him, but Fatima is inside of it. Ibn Khattab said, "Ahrikul bayta laman fiha." Burn down the house with everyone who is inside of it. These same words that were said in Saqifa, the same words that repeated themselves on Shab Ghariban. As the tents were burning, the women ran out in every direction. Sayyidah Khadija also ran out. Today I read in one of the Makatib that when she died in Kufa, she died while she was injured. Allahu Akbar. These are words that are thaqil. Sayyidah Khadija, daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen, was injured. Do you know what injuries these are? These are injuries that are burn marks on the body from the burning tents. Injuries on the body, these are the manner in which they whipped Sayyidah Khadija bint Amir al-Mu'mineen. This Sayyidah Khadija, when she came out of the burning tents, and Sayyidah Zainab collected all the women, they collected all the children. When everything was burnt and they looted everything, Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam gathered all the women. She gathered all the children. Maktab says, Sayyidah Zainab, because Imam al-Hussein had left her in charge. He said, Zainab, you are in charge of Imam Sajjad and my children and my women. But this is Sayyidah Zainab's responsibility. When everything finished, the tents have been burnt, everything has been looted. They gathered the women, they gathered the children. Sayyidah Zainab starts counting the children. Wow, 2 children are missing. Whose children are these? These are the children of Sayyidah Khadija bint Amir al-Mu'mineen. Allah, Allah. Sayyidah Zainab looks at Sayyidah Khadija. Sayyidah Zainab looks at Sayyidah Khadija and she looks up towards the heaven. She cried out, Ya Rasulullah. She's just lost her husband. Her 2 sons are shaheed in the Maidan. And the 2 children that she had as consolation are missing. Where did they go? Sayyidah Zainab hugs Sayyidah Khadija. She gives her sabr. This is a woman who has fled from the burning tent, who has been whipped, who has been hit. Her 2 young children are missing. Allah. Sayyidah Zainab says to Kulthum, take care of Sayyidah Khadija. Sayyidah Layla, Sayyidah Rabab, sit with Sayyidah Khadija. Sayyidah Zainab goes into the Maidan to look for these children. The Maktab says, Sayyidah Zainab found 2 young boys. Allah. Sayyidah Zainab says she found 2 young boys seated, lying down by a palm tree, hugging each other. Allah. Sayyidah Zainab thought the children may be sleeping. She goes to wake them up. 2 children, their ruh have left their body. The Maktal says children who died out of fear and out of grief, running out from the burning tents. This is that mother Sayyidah Khadija. This is that mother Sayyidah Khadija bint Amir al-Mu'mineen. They tied ropes around her hands. They tied ropes around her legs. They brought her to Kufa. And within Kufa, the first Shahida from the Sabaya of Al Mohamed, Sayyidah Khadija, passed away over here and she was buried by Sayyidah Zainab. Hatman, when you go to Masjid Kufa, perform the ziyarah of Sayyidah Khadija bint Amir al-Mu'mineen. Today I was looking through the Makatil and I thought to myself, what sort of injuries, the emotional grief of having lost 4 of your children and your husband in this way is one thing. To be whipped on the back is one thing. I'm going to say this statement twice in the Maktal tonight in the Masa'ib, and each one has its own meaning. But I thought to myself, I said, what type of injury must have Sayeda Khadija got? Because the historians mention, فَمَاتَتْ وَهِيَ جَرِيحَةٌ. She died while she was covered in injuries, with wounds. I said, what type of injury would have caused the death of this woman, this daughter of Amir al-Mu'minin? And I find the words of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam says, every time if our women or our children cried, they were hit with spears on the head. Allah! If you look into this and you know that Sayeda Khadija died out of injury, I don't know this Zalim, how he must have hit Sayeda Khadija with a spear on the head. But what I can tell you is, in today's medical terms, the concussion was enough to take the life of the This is Kufa. They haven't even started walking to Shah. They haven't even started walking to Shah. The historians mention Sayeda Khadija. May Allah and may Sayeda Khadija bint Amir al-Mu'minin, this lady Madluma, no one does her dhikr. May she have mercy on your tears and perform shafa'a for you and your families to come. Hi, Sayeda Khadija. The second one to become Shaheed or Shaheeda in the city of Hilla, the daughter of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba by the name of Sayeda Sharifa. She has a mazar even today, Sayeda Sharifa bint al-Hassan. Historians say Sharifa is a title for Sayyid, for Alawiya. Her name was Sayeda Fatima. And you find that Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba had a number of daughters who were called Sayeda Fatima. This Sayeda Fatima bint Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba was the second of the women to become Shaheeda. They reached Hilla, and this young girl who was at the least 10 years of age became Shaheeda at this place in Hilla. Allah, Allah. The heart of Sayyida Zainab al-Kubra. She has married 2 women from Bani Hashim, and they're still walking towards Sham. The narrations mention in this way. Ali Muhammad walked from Mosul to Tikrit and so on, Sinjar. There were cities which refused to accept the prisoners from Ali Muhammad. Said, we don't want to be a city that will receive prisoners from the family of Rasulullah. And then there are cities that decorated. There were cities that threw stones. There were cities that laughed on them. And there are cities where they abused them and they abused Amir al-Mu'minin. One of these cities, and tonight the dhikr of this granddaughter of Imam al-Hussein, Sayeda Khawla, who is married in Baalbak. In this manner, Ali Muhammad traveled until they reached the city of Baalbak. They reached the city of Baalbak on the 28th of Muharram. Allah. 28th of Muharram, the historians mention, at that time Baalbak was Nasibi. And when the announcement was made by Shimar al-La'in that the prisoners of Ali Muhammad are coming into the city, a messenger was sent the people of Baalbak began to decorate the city. They began to decorate the city, and an announcement was made by the governor. Today is announced as a public day of a holiday. The bazaar and the souk are to be closed. This is to free up the people so they can line up and they can rejoice and celebrate the victory of the Amir over the people of Ali Muhammad. The narrations mention they entered into the city of Baalbak. They were beating drums and they were laughing and celebrating. And it is in this city of Baalbak that Sayeda Khawla became Shahida. Allah, Allah. Sayeda Khawla did not even make it. When you look, that there are two girls that have already passed away on the path to Shad. It makes you understand how strong in her heart Sayyidah Ruqayya was. Because she survived and she made it to Shad. But before her, there are three other girls, Sayeda Khawla, Sayeda Safiya, Sayeda Sharifa, who didn't even make it to Shad. The narrations mention that Sayeda Khawla became Shahida in Baalbak. Sayeda Zainab al-Kubra gives her the ghusl. Imam Sajjad with his hands begins to dig the grave for Sayeda Khawla. Allah, don't ask me how they laid her down in the grave. Don't ask me how Sayeda Zainab threw sand on the grave. But there is no marking of a grave. The narrations mention Imam Zainul Abidin planted a tree next to the grave, such that at least when the tree grows, people will know that there is a yatim of Hussein who is buried here. Allah, Allah, you look back into the Maqatil, how is it? The Maqtal doesn't tell you. Maqtal doesn't tell you how Sayeda Khawla died. But if you put all the Qara'in together, you find that there are three reasons over here that caused the death of Sayeda Khawla. Number one, these women, these children were not given enough food. They were not given enough drink during the entire journey. Which is why Sayyidah Fitna says, every time we stopped, they would eat and they would drink in front of us while our children were dying of hunger. Allah, Allah, Sayyidah Khawla, no food, no water. Number two, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam says, like I said for Sayyidah Khadija, every time the women and the children cried, they were hit with spears on the head. Ya Mohamed, you tell me, those of you who have daughters over here, you have 3-year-old Sayyidah Khawla, and this is the head of her father on the spear, and she doesn't cry. If you can count the tears that came out from the eyes of Sayyidah Khawla, you know how many times she was hit on the head with this. Allah, Allah, Ya Shaytan Muhammad, the Maqatil mentioned that the Sabaya of Ali Muhammad had to reach Sham in the fastest way. So Shimar al-Lail and the likes of Khuli, they would make sure that everything was done, that the Qafila does not slow down. There were times the women and the children were made to walk, and there were times they were made to ride onto the camels. And when they were on the camels were run at their fastest speed. Within the Maqatil, it is mentioned over here. Before I come to the part of the Maqtal, today I was looking up for when the camel travels through the desert at its fastest speed. The leg of the camel is created in such a way that when the camel walks, it moves side to side. And if you understand that the camel moves side to side, the rider also moves side to side. In the Maqtal, it is mentioned over here that whenever any one of the children or the women fell off the camel, Allah, so now you understand, children were falling off the camel. when the children fell off the camel because they didn't want to stop and they had to travel the distance. They tied the children to the Don't ask me how long Sayeda Khawla was dragged from the stomach of the camel. مات من زينب مات من خولة